via Periscope, so you're aware. So that's why we've got the camera at the back of the room, and a very warm welcome to everybody who's listening in through Periscope. I think it also means that this will go on our website, and so will be available on catch-up, like TV channels. So just so everyone's aware that that's what will happen, and your questions and comments will be preserved for a little while at least in that format. The other thing to say is that we also have an SRA photographer who's in this morning. Now, they may come into this session. They're actually here to take photographs of SRA staff primarily, us doing our job of work, not primarily you, but if anybody does not want to have their photograph taken, can they just say so? And what we could do is put people on a sort of a separate table, and I just mentioned, it sounds terrible, isn't it? But put people on a separate table so that the photographer knows to avoid that table if anybody has a problem with that. No? Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for not being disrupted by that. So. This session on the SQE, we're going to go through some of the basics about the SQE and then hand over, I'll do that, and then I'll hand over to Eileen, who will talk in a little bit more detail about assessment methodology, and we'll look at the detail of the sorts of questions that we would want to include in the SQE and the sort of questions that we would not want to include, so there'll be a little bit more detail coming out there. Please do just stick up your hands if you've got a question to ask or a comment to make as we go through. We're very happy to take those on an ongoing basis. We may also pick up questions, I think, from people listening on Periscope. But before we launch into the detail of that, can I just do a quick round the room so everybody knows who everybody is here? So, shall I give you just sat down? Let me start on this side of the room.
Hi, my name's Dara Reid. I'm the HR and Compliance Director at the Wilkes Partnership.
Andy Worley, Ashford Solicitors, I'm the training principal.
I'm Stacey Davis, I work at Gately and I manage all of the graduate recruitment. I'm Emily Keith, I work at Shakespeare Martineau as a HR advisor, specifically looking after early ambition.
I'm Catherine Edwards, I'm Director of Learning and Development at Birmingham Law Society, and I'm also a Senior Practitioner for Key University.
I'm Paul McConnell from University of Birmingham, where I'm Deputy Head of Education, which involves the SQE and how we respond to it.
I'm Anna Shaw, Head of Product Development for Central Law Training.
John Goodman, Head of Law Stephen Bailey, University of Nottingham and the Society of Legal Scholars.
I'm Sunil Hamza, Head of Law School, University of Wolverhampton.
I'm Bernard Young from Ian Henry Solicitors. I'm a director there.
So thank you very much, and a big thank you to all of you for coming along this morning. It's great to see both familiar faces and new faces. So what we will do is we will go through some of the basics about SQE before we go on to the details, so that I hope everybody understands what it is that we're doing. That does mean that some people who've been to these sessions before will see slides that they are familiar with from previous presentations. But it's always good to reinforce messages, as the educationists in the room will know. It's also fantastic to have both academics and the profession here in one room, and I think that dialogue between academia and professions is a really, really valuable thing to happen, and I hope that that will ping off ideas and comments and observations between you. Okay, so let's, as I say, start off with the basics. What is the SQE? People will be familiar with this jigsaw puzzle slide that we've used for a number of years now about the SQE, but it captures neatly our requirements for admission as a solicitor once the SQE comes in. And it's important to recognise that there will be 4 requirements, so SQE is just one of them, and that they are not in any chronological order. So we have a requirement for a degree or equivalent qualification, so of course that could be the solicitor apprenticeship or a higher apprenticeship. It could be a law degree or a non-law degree, but we want there to be that degree level of learning as a requirement for admission as a solicitor. SQE stages 1 and 2, we'll come on to have a look at those in more detail in a moment. a substantial period of work experience, which will be of at least 2 years, and I'll look at that and describe that in a little bit more detail also in a moment. And satisfactory character and suitability. So that's the character and suitability test that exists at the moment. And obviously, we need to continue to look at the character and suitability of individuals who wish to be admitted as a solicitor. And the core of this is that instead of different exams set by different universities, there will be a national licensing examination which we will set and CAPLAN will deliver on our behalf. And our regulation will focus around that rather than on regulating and specifying particular pathways that lead up to the acquisition of those competencies required for practice as a solicitor. And the concept around that is that really we are interested as regulator in ensuring that everybody who is admitted as a solicitor has the necessary core skills, knowledge needed for safe practice. And we are not interested in how they acquire those. We're interested just in making sure that we have a good, rigorous check that they have acquired those competencies rather than specifying how they should be acquired. And therefore, we think that the SQE will benefit all these groups. We think it will benefit the public, because the public will have greater confidence in the competence of the solicitors that they use. They will know they've all been assessed to the same standard. And actually, when we went out and talked to members of the public about this, 4 out of 5, 80%, told us that they would have greater confidence in solicitors if they had all taken the same assessment. Law firms will have greater guarantee of standards on lateral hires, for example, or at point of admission. And they'll have greater opportunities to tailor training to their needs because the SQE only covers core competencies. So more flexibility for law firms to work closely with local education training providers around extra training if that's what they think is needed for the particular roles they wish to fill, as opposed to the overall professional competence. Education training providers, we think there'll be more ability for them to teach in the way that they think is the best way to teach for their students, rather than us specifying it. At the moment, on the LPC, we tell people how to teach. We say whether it should be by face-to-face learning or distance learning. We specify that, rather than leaving it to the expertise of the education training providers who have real knowledge and experience in that area. We're a regulator, we are not education specialists, and we think it's better to leave that to those who do have that expertise. And also more opportunity to demonstrate the quality of their teaching and what differentiates them. And for would-be solicitors, more fairness, because everybody's assessed to the same standard, and more choice, because we will no longer specify particular pathways, so we think there will be a far greater range of ways to qualify as a solicitor. I said earlier that the 4 pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are not in any chronological order. They're things that need to be demonstrated by point of admission. And that's very deliberate. We do not want to specify things in chronological order or have rules about timing, because we end up then policing those rules rather than policing endpoint standards. So we've tried to keep these rules to a minimum. But we have got some of them. We have got some rules, and these are the really critical rules. We say that SQE1 must be passed before SQE2 can be attempted. And we also say that there is a maximum of 3 attempts at the SQE over 6 years. So from first attempt at SQE1 until final completion of SQE2, that may take no longer than 6 years. Within that period, if you pass some bits and fail bits, you can bank the bits that you have passed. You don't need to repeat that training. But at the end of the 6 years, if you haven't acquired all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, you have to go back to the beginning and start all over again. So just pinging back very quickly, what this means in terms of this is not in chronological order, is that the degree or equivalent qualification is not a prerequisite for taking SQE1 or 2. It's something that has to be done by the time you get to point of admission. And you can see that if you look at the apprenticeship, so the apprenticeship, people will start on the apprenticeship and start their qualifying work experience and start getting their degree or equivalent qualification before they take SQE stages 1 and 2. But they don't need to do that. And if somebody they won't have completed it, they started, won't have completed it by the time they take SQE stage 1 and 2, because they will do that during the period of their apprenticeship. And that gives us that flexibility to permit that way of training. What is SQE stage 1? Well, it's a test of what we call functioning legal knowledge. So these are a summary of the topics that SQE1 will assess. They are both substantive knowledge, substantive areas of knowledge and procedural areas of knowledge. So things that at the moment are taught as part of a qualifying law degree and things that are taught as part of an LPC. So the SQE stage 1 will integrate both of those. In earlier versions of this, we had them set out into 6 exams. We may end up with 6 separate assessments, but that is something we are looking at the moment. It's part of a piece of work that Kaplan's been doing in terms of a technical review of the assessment. We want to look at what the minimum amount of assessment is for us to be sure that people are safe to be admitted, and that may be fewer questions than we have said previously, maybe fewer actual assessments. We want to have a look at that, but just be sure that the amount of questions, the amount of assessment enables us to sample the curriculum effectively and test all these areas. So that's a piece of work that's ongoing at the moment. And we also have a practical legal skills assessment as part of SQE stage 1. Again, we will look at that and check that we can do that reliably and validly through the piloting. But what that is driven by is feedback from the profession and from firms that wanted, that liked the fact that the LPC, as it is at the moment, includes skills training and valued their trainees' skills training when they arrive in practice, and therefore wanted to see this incorporated into stage 1 so that people, those employers who required SQE stage 1 to be completed before qualifying work experience started, would have confidence that the people who were on qualifying work experience had these legal research and writing skills as a sort of at a threshold level before they arrived in the office. SQE stage 2 is a test of legal skills, and we've got up there the 5 skills that we plan to test through SQE stage 2. There seems to have been a remarkable amount of consensus around those skills. They do seem to be the right skills that people say we should be testing. So we will be taking those through into the piloting phase. The context is something, again, that we want to look at more closely. What we have said is that, so far, what we have said is that candidates should be tested in at least 2 of these areas at their choice. We had a lot of feedback around that. People said, well, actually, does it have to be 2? Does it have to be more? Does it have to be fewer? Do the contexts have to be more? There are pros and cons around that. The greater the number of contexts, the greater the difficulty in terms of establishing comparability between the different assessments, the greater the cost. And one of the things about these areas is that they have all been assessed in terms of substantive knowledge at SQE1 stage. So that gives a level playing field in terms of a basic platform of legal knowledge to build on in terms of SQE2 assessment. But that's all something that we will look at with colleagues from Kaplan as we go through the piloting and testing phase. Qualifying work experience, we've got quite a lot of people here from law firms today, and so you may be particularly interested in this. Again, SQE1 is not a prerequisite for the start of qualifying work experience, although we do anticipate that many law firms will say, well, actually, we want candidates to have completed SQE1 before they start their qualifying work experience. But that's a question for law firms, that's a decision for law firms, it's not a regulatory rule. And likewise, completion of qualifying work experience is not a prerequisite for SQE2. Again, it's a decision for law firms. We think that qualifying work experience will undoubtedly help people gain those skills that they will be assessed on in SQE2. But it's a question for law firms about whether they specify that their candidates must have completed a certain amount of qualifying work experience, where they must have completed it, etc., before they take their candidates take SQE2. It's not a regulatory rule. So as long as people have acquired SQE1, qualifying work experience, and SQE2 by point of admission, that is all that we require. We do not specify them in any particular order. Interested to hear views around that. We know that particularly around the timing for qualifying work experience and SQE2, there are different views. And if people have different views around that, please do speak up. I'm interested to hear that. But that's about the timing and the sequencing. In terms of our requirements, what we require of qualifying work experience is that it's at least 2 years' experience in legal services, which enables a candidate to develop the competencies set out in the solicitor's competence statement. We have a rule that they need not be obtained, that 2 years need not be in a single organisation, but it must be in no more than 4 organisations. So you may have people going around different organisations and acquiring that work experience. There's no requirement for that to be in different practice areas. It may be in different practice areas, and some law firms have said that they value the breadth of experience that people gain in different practice areas, and of course that's a matter for the law firms to decide upon in terms of their own employees. But it's not a regulatory requirement. What we are interested in is the development of the competencies. Yes, there was a hand at the back.
Sorry, Julia. Are they minimum 6 months for any?
No, so the question is the 4 different placements, is it a minimum of 6 months in each? It's not. So it can be differing lengths of time. But of course what that means is that if one is shorter, then another must be proportionately longer. And what we think is that that protects against the risk that somebody is in and out so quickly that they don't see the consequences of their decisions on a case coming back. So if there's a very small placement, then there will be a longer placement where somebody will take longer in a particular organisation.
Thank you.
And this work experience must be signed off by somebody who we have a regulatory relationship with. So that may be the COLP, where there is a COLP. Where there isn't a COLP, for example, where it's an in-house department, it must be signed off by a solicitor. That solicitor need not have a practicing certificate, but they must be on the roll. And that's an important regulatory protection for us, because if we have somebody who lies about or is dishonest about qualifying work experience, then we can take regulatory action against them. But there will no longer be a regulated training principal role. So law firms may decide they wish to continue to have a training principal. That's entirely up to them how they organise themselves. But we will not require law firms to have a training principal. And a solicitor, what we wanted to do was bring in work experience at university law clinics, which is increasing in popularity, I think, in lots of different universities. We wanted to bring that within the ambit of qualifying work experience. What we envisage is that a solicitor in a university can sign off work experience in a law clinic at the university. Now in that case, they will sign that off as a solicitor, but we know that some universities send out their trainees into practice. So sorry, not their trainees, their students. So their students may go into a large number of different law firms, and together that acquires a portfolio of experience that the university, as it were, signs off. And in that case, what the solicitor in the university can sign that off. That can count as one of the 4. So it's, if you like, it provides a sort of umbrella for a university to sign off experience in lots of different organisations. But there are some extra protections there that I put on the slide, where we would require the person signing off that experience to have spoken to the supervisor and have some experience of the candidate's work, perhaps through a portfolio, through a diary, or as it says there, into the form of feedback from the supervisor. So we do know that that work has taken place. Okay, practical arrangements. There will be a minimum of 2 exam sittings per year. As I said at the bottom there, in the future, we expect sittings and venues to increase to keep pace with demand. We expect when the SQE comes in that it's likely that there will be smaller numbers as we get work through the transition period. So we will start off with 2 exam sittings per year. We've talked in these roundtables to people about when people would like those to happen. I mean, what Eileen regularly says at this point is that actually CAPLAN doesn't really make a huge amount of difference to CAPLAN when these happen, so we're happy to take feedback from people about this. I think what we have heard so far is that people would like this to be to disrupt existing timetables as little as possible. Some universities will be incorporating SQE preparatory training into their degrees, in which case it might be helpful for students to have these exams about the same time that they take their final exams or shortly afterwards. Other universities will not be doing that, in which case, and their students may need to go and have a bit of a top-up prep course for SQE, in which case there needs to be a sitting perhaps later on in the year. So perhaps we might be looking at something like sort of June, December, something like that. But we, again, interested to hear views in the room. Any observations about that? Nothing immediately. I mean, happy, let that mull over and do let us know. Yes, Stephen.
Well, I think one important variable will be how much knowledge the students will be expected to take into the exam. And the more there is, then I suspect the more preparation time for the exam will be needed than just putting it in the week after you've done other finals. Particularly as the finals in a 3-year degree won't be covering all the work that's done in the degree.
Yes, that's true. I suppose it depends on different university structures and how different universities align to that, and whether they change, whether their structures change to reflect the summative assessment of knowledge, which effectively happens to SQE1. And in terms of the availability of the SQE, it's going to be available widely. So CAPLAN have partnered with Pearson VUE, who run the driving test theory exam. There's a very large network, isn't there, Eileen? I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, so all the written exams will be delivered through Pearson VUE test centres, and I think there is a Pearson VUE test centre within 40 miles of where everybody lives. But anyway, there are an awful lot of them in England and Wales, so there will be a very wide distribution network for the written exams. For the oral skills, there will be fewer centres, obviously partly because of the need to standardise the candidate experience, but they will still be, and they will not be available, certainly not initially, internationally. So the written tests will be available internationally, but not the oral tests. But the oral tests will be available both in England and Wales. Wales is only greyed out because it's a different country. So that it will be single jurisdiction of different countries, so it'll be available in both countries. And as I say, we will keep the review, and we will want the places and the venues and so on to keep pace with demand. Transition. We consulted this time last year about transition arrangements, and we have that's with the LSV for approval at the moment. I say though, the SQE was introduced in 2020. The last academic year on the old system will be 2019 to 20. And in a nutshell, what we envisage is that anybody who has started to train before the SQE comes into force will have the choice of qualifying under the old or new system. But people who start to train after the SQE comes into force will have to train under the new system. What start to train means is anybody who has started a qualifying law degree or a CP or is at any stage further down the current routes beyond that
but it's actually, if you have a look at the regulations, it's slightly wider than that. It's start to train or entered into a financial or legal commitment to start the course. So have a look at those regulations are on our website, so do have a look at them. So it's not just physically turning up in the classroom, it's actually somebody who has started, who's put down a deposit, registered, got a contract to start the course. They will be called, but they will be able to continue under the old system. Okay, I think that's all from me, unless anybody has any questions before I hand over to Eileen. Yes.
Sorry, two things. So on the time limit,
Yes.
does that mean, I don't know if I'm probably trying to say that,
Yes.
but does that mean if I am doing a non-law degree
Yes.
and I graduate in physics,
Yes.
September, in August 2020,
Yes.
I could start the SQE September 2020.
Yes.
When's the first time I can sit my SQE exam?
So that would, I'll talk about timing later on this morning.
Okay.
So whether in terms of the decision of whether it's 2020 or 2021.
Oh,
but
okay.
if it's if we're talking about September 2020, then there will be, the SQE will be available sometime that autumn. As I say, the exact sitting dates are still to be fixed. But
No,
sometime
but
that
it's almost the delivery of the. Okay, so it starts September. If we go to 2020, it starts September.
Yeah.
That's where everything starts.
That's
like, sorry,
September,
October.
Catherine.
Okay.
Sorry, just so I can get this straight in my head. In terms of the start to train
Yes.
and the entering into a legal or financial commitment, say we had your GDL student who finishes their physics degree in July 2020. If they're being sponsored by a firm, or they will have a training contract, if they enter into that commitment with the firm in July 2020, they don't have to do the SQE because
Yes.
they've
So if they've
started
entered
the
into a financial or legal obligation to train under the old system, then that would get them into the transitional cohort. That's
So
right.
for firms who may want to see how the SQE plays out,
that gives them that
their
flexibility.
offers prior to September 2020 are pretty crucial.
That's right. Yeah. And it gives them that flexibility, exactly so.
Thanks.
Okay. Is it this one or is it one? Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to start by saying, perhaps I should introduce myself to start with. I'm Eileen Fry and I'm Director at the SQE at Kaplan, and as you know we have been appointed as the assessment organisation to help design and deliver the SQE on behalf of the SRA. So I wanted to start by saying a bit about Kaplan, to try and really reassure you that we have the capacity to do this very sort of important task. So it's an SQE team run by solicitors. I'm a solicitor. And so, we have a background in legal practice. Many of us have also been involved in legal education. And we've got unique experience and expertise really in professional assessment leading to licensure in England and Wales. So as you may know, we've run the Qualified Lawyers Transfer Scheme on behalf of the SRA since 2011. Our approach to sort of assuring the quality of the assessment design is this kind of structured one, where we will have internal psychometricians helping us to design it, but it is also going to be overseen by a very distinguished advisory board with senior psychometricians from the US, including a former director of testing from the National Conference of Bar Examiners, and someone with a similar job at the National Board of Medical Examiners in the US. And that, just to explain that decision, I think the kind of methodology on which the SQE will be based is the methodology that is already used in medical exams in the UK. It's been used for sort of 30 or 40 years, I think. And it is used in other jurisdictions, so particularly in the US and also for doctors in the US. Okay. So I want to start by, sorry, was that? No. I want to start by saying a bit about the sort of underlying theory of the exam, and then I'll go on to actually talk about the types of questions we'll use, particularly look at the sort of much maligned and multiple choice questions. So just to say a bit about the underlying theory, which will sort of inform the development and design of the SQE. So contemporary assessment practice really is based on for licensure, is based on the idea that those kind of exams with such high stakes have to fulfill very different criteria from, say, university exams. So they're centred around these three concepts of validity, reliability, and accuracy, and also the idea that the pass mark has to be sort of clearly relatable to the difficulty of the assessment. And really nowadays, if you've got a central assessment that has such important consequences, if you don't satisfy those things, it's not going to be legally defensible in the courts. The sort of basic underlying idea is that luck must play as small a part as possible. Luck and other factors must play as smaller part as possible. So, as perhaps a more traditional exam where, say, you have, I don't know, 4 essays or 6 essays or whatever, but a limited number of questions, there's this sort of idea that if your question comes up, you know, the stuff you've revised, it's fine, you're going to do well. If it doesn't, you're not going to do as well. And so the underlying theory behind this is really that you have to minimise the role of luck in deciding who passes, in the design of the exam in terms of who passes and fails. As I said, then I'll go on to also look at something about methods of assessment. So to explain a bit more about the sort of fundamental ideas underlying the design of this kind of exam, there's sort of 3 key concepts. The first one, validity, is about, are you testing the right things and are you testing them in an appropriate way? And really the only way you're going to find out about that is consultation with stakeholders, with people who know what day one solicitors do. So are you really testing what a day one solicitor needs to know to be in practice? And that's a qualitative judgment. The ideas of reliability and accuracy are statistical judgments. They're based around statistical notions. So reliability is about how reproducible the results of an exam are. So if the same cohort sat a similar but different exam, would it order them in the same order? Now you're never going to get perfect symmetry between those two, unless they sit the same exam. But you want to get it within what are generally considered to be acceptable bounds, and they're pretty high. So again, it's about people not passing by luck because this paper favours them and another paper favours other people. And then the idea of accuracy is related to the idea of reliability, and it's based on the idea that in all measurement there is some error. And you have, again, it can be calculated statistically, and the error has to be within acceptable bounds. So again, the people that deserve to pass have to pass, and the people that deserve to fail have to fail. And you're going to get that sort of, you want that band where the sort of error band to be as small as possible. And again, there are accepted sort of statistical parameters that has to go within. And it's measured by a statistic called the standard error of measurement. And I can talk more about statistics if you want me to, but not right now. So the other thing I said was sort of fundamental to the approach and the design of the exam was about setting the pass marks. And I think this is correct. That's the sort of current position. On the whole, most universities it's 40% pass for an undergraduate degree, LPCs are 50%, BPTC is 60%. So if you start from a number like that, the question is what are you going to choose and how are you going to justify it to somebody who challenges your decision. So what the alternative is not to start from a number, but to start from a description of competency. So the notion is that you have a description of what a day one solicitor, just passing day one solicitor, and you apply it to the scripts. And that is done in different ways. That there's a whole sort of literature about the ways that can be done. And obviously it has to be done in different ways for different types of exams. So say for a multiple choice exam, it's clearly going to be a very different methodology than for a skills exam. And again, I won't go into the detail of that now, maybe afterwards if you want me to, but that's the underlying idea, is that, so it's not, so the number that passed or whatever is not determined by the cohort they're in or anything like that. It is actually determined by the standard. And I suppose what this is trying to do is to allow for the fact that different exams, however carefully they are set, will differ slightly in difficulty. I mean, it may not be much, but if you've got someone very close to the pass mark, it's what counts. Okay, so why does the theory matter, all this theory? So as I said, really, in a high-stakes exam of this sort, it's expensive, it has serious consequences, you have to minimise the role of luck in who passes. And, responsibility to the consumer, responsibility to the profession, responsibility to candidates, and sort of underlying thing about it being defensible in the courts. Okay. That's all I'm going to say about the sort of assessment methodology, but we can come back to it if you want. So I'm going to talk a bit about methods of assessment. And your favourite thing probably, which is multiple choice questions. So there are some people doing a multiple choice exam. There I hope are most of your criticisms of multiple choice questions. You can probably think of some others, but they're the sort of fairly standard criticisms. And I have to say, I'm not saying multiple choice questions are perfect, but I'm saying that if they're well drafted, they're better than a lot of people think, and they have some very strong advantages. So the sort of thing, you can guess the answer, they just test memory, not intellectually rigorous, they test different type facts, they've not got no relationship to what lawyers have to do. So what we would say is that a lot of the criticism of multiple choice questions is about this badly drafted multiple choice questions. So I'm going to go through two multiple choice questions, one which we would consider, in fact four multiple choice questions, two that we would consider to be well drafted, and two that we really wouldn't want to use. So the first one is a capital gains tax question. And why we would say it's well drafted is it involves application. It's not just memory. You have to understand how capital gains tax works and apply it. The answers are all about the same sort of thing. They're not being asked to compare apples and pears. They're all reasons as to why, whether capital gains tax should be applied and the reason. And well, obviously, if you've got 5 alternatives, you can guess, but you can also discount for guessing. All the distractors are based on, so the answers that aren't true, aren't right, are based on common misconceptions and sort of faulty reasoning that students often come up with. So if I can take you through the answers. So the first one is a good distractor because the nephew is entitled to the principal private residence exemption. is not entitled, but that doesn't sort of bring in the gain that the woman had of the property while it was in the woman's ownership. So people who don't really understand how the principal private residence exemption works may choose that. Next one is a good distractor because quite a few students do think that if there's a gift, so no money is actually realised, then there's no liability to capital gains tax. Third one is a good distractor because holdover relief has got something to do with gifts. Please don't ask me to explain exactly what, but it doesn't apply in this situation. But if you just know a bit and you know holdover relief has got something to do with gifts, you might well choose that. The fourth one is correct. And the fifth one, well, it is charged on all disposals of land except for when principal private residence exemption applies. So it's got a clear correct answer. It's got distractors based on faulty reasoning and so on, and it's something that a day one solicitor should be able to do. So then we have a wills one. Trusts, wills. So, it's application of fundamental principles. It's not some sort of nitpicky fact that you've got to remember. It's something people should know or be able to understand. The answers are all parallel because they're all reasons. The distractors are based on common misconceptions. So actually I should have said about the capital gains tax one. We've used it a few times. The pass rate is normally just over 50%, get it right. This one is slightly lower. It's slightly under 50%. So the first A is a good distractor because where there is the power to advance capital, it used to be that you could only advance 50%. I think you can advance 100% now. B is a good distractor because if the money was still in the trust, the business would probably not be a permitted investment. C is for the guessers because it's a good distractor because something's obviously gone wrong. She's used the money in a way that she shouldn't have, so that feels wrong, so we might as well go for C. D is correct because she's a life tenant. She's only entitled to income. And E is a good distractor because the children are entitled to capital if the widow consents. But sort of keeping some of it herself and passing some of it on doesn't solve the problem. Okay, and then I'm going to go for two that I think better reflect common prejudices. So the sort of question we wouldn't use: how many days before a summary judgment hearing must the respondent serve any evidence in reply? So it's memory. If you didn't know, you'd look it up. It's fairly nitpicky. I mean, it's important, but you could look it up. It's not application of fundamental legal principles. The answers overlap, C and D. And none of the above is never a good answer because a very clever, thoughtful student may think of a reason why it might apply. So in this case, it would apply if you made an application to the court. Now that's not included in the facts, but clearly somebody who was thinking a bit beyond might consider that as the correct answer, and they wouldn't be wrong. So there isn't a clear correct answer. Sort of question we would not use: So no application. Kind of raises the question, who cares anyway? It's just definitions. You're not being asked to compare similar things because two are about general damages and two are about special damages. I think definitions probably vary anyway. And you've got secondary layers of analysis. You don't want any secondary layer. You will find this does not have very good statistics because those that are better at dealing with the secondary layers of analysis will do better than those that it's not secondary layers of analysis is not about application of fundamental legal principles. So there are some advantages to good multiple choice questions. We can assess application of fundamental legal principles if they're well written. You can assess a much larger number of topics, which is appropriate for something like competency, for licensure. And that also reduces the likelihood that candidates will pass or fail by luck. Obviously, they can be marked consistently over any number of candidates, and they're less open to allegations of subjectivity and bias. I should say they're extremely hard to write. It could easily take a day to write a good multiple choice question. Okay, then just a little bit about the skills. There's some people about to do interviews. So they can assess competencies that multiple choice questions really can't assess. So oral skills, research, drafting, writing. There are big challenges. One is realism. So we do use professional actors who are amazingly good, and we do get candidates who forget an assessment. I know that sounds ridiculous, but we do. But there are big challenges clearly about standardisation, and it requires a huge amount of training and monitoring. Okay, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So, is everything okay on the technology? Yeah?
Yep.
Yep, okay, fine. So, I wanted to let people know where we were in terms of moving ahead with our regulations and the implementation plans, and particularly we're very, very conscious of the fact that people want to have clear information as soon as possible about timing and about fees. On timing, we know that universities in particular, but all stakeholders, need to have a clear understanding of when SQE will come in and have that as early as possible. So we are looking at this very, very actively at the moment, and we hope to be able to release an indication of whether it will be 2020 or 2021 before the end of 2018. I've set out on the slide a number of factors that we will take into account in reaching this decision. And it's fair to say that I think both Kaplan and ourselves, in terms of the systems and procedures we need to do in terms of the piloting and testing that Kaplan needs to undertake, we think we can be ready by 2020, but we're also very mindful of the fact that stakeholders have a lot of work to do to adjust to take SQE into account in terms of what you do. So universities need to think about their courses, how they review their courses, what it means for what they offer and what they say to their students. Law firms need to think about what it means for you in terms of your internal training systems and also your recruitment, the recruitment decisions you have to make. And a message that we've had from people pretty consistently is as much advance notice as we can have, the better. So that's the position on timing. So far as fees are concerned, likewise people want to have an indication about this. Now, the challenge in relation to fees is that the exact fee will depend on the exact assessment design. I mean, you heard from Eileen a moment ago that it can take up to a day to write a single question. So the number of questions in the SQE will drive the fees quite substantially. And the overall assessment design will have the same effect. The number of contexts that we have for SQE2, the number of questions in SQE1, whether and what processes we put in place around a Welsh version of the SQE. All of those decisions that have to be made will have an impact on fees. But what we hope to be able to do is to release a fee range, to give the market an indication of the parameters within which the SQE candidate fees may be set. So people can take those into account, candidates can take that into account in deciding which of the routes to qualification, those who have a choice, works best for them. Training providers understand what the assessment cost is going to be and can take that into account in terms of developing their own training and what their training costs are going to be. And again, we hope to get that information out to the market also before the end of 2018. And then testing and piloting, I think back over to you.
Okay, so just to say a bit about the work we're doing now. So we will be running pilots with a full run proposed assessment, and we'll be looking at the sort of things that I kind of indicated earlier. So reproducibility and precision of scores, how is setting the pass mark, importantly approaches to reporting candidate scores, both in terms of the candidates and the firms, and what's the most helpful way of telling them about their results, and approaches to detecting bias. In terms of candidates, we will want as representative groups as possible, the candidates that will later sit the SQE. And selection of candidates will be by application form, which I think will be on the SRA website. We're looking at different ways of one of the problems about pilots is you have to actually get the candidates to sort of engage with it fully and to try really hard. And we're looking at different ways of achieving that. And I don't know if any of the firms were interested in getting involved and maybe offering a placement or an interview or whatever to any candidates who do well. That would be very helpful. Or any other ideas that you have that you think would work and that would help you as well. And then we're also working on a revised assessment specification, and this will probably go through many sort of drafts and consultations. But just to sort of outline some of the basics, it will answer the question, what will the SQE assess and how will it be assessed, but it won't tell you how to teach it, or what order to teach it, or any of that. We'll obviously set out the format of the assessments, which will involve all these decisions, so numbers of pass-fail points, length of assessments, etc. Presented in as clear and intelligible way as possible. Centre around a statement of the overall purpose of the assessment. I think it's Annex 2, Statement of Functioning Legal Knowledge, and Statement of Competence and the Threshold Standard, which are already in existence. And what we will also do is an exercise called blueprinting, which will do that with sort of representative stakeholder groups. And that exercise is designed to decide what emphasis is given to different areas. So it's not going to be, you're going to get 2 questions on consideration and 1 question on, I don't know, negligence. But it would give a broad indication of the kind of emphasis, you know, on 20% on contract or whatever it would, I mean, it's not going to be 20% on contract, but whatever it would be, it would give a broad overall emphasis. And it will be accompanied by a lot of sample questions. So on the multiple choice, we would hope to have a lot of questions, obviously with the correct answer, and with an indication of what the pass mark would be across all of those questions. On the stage 2 skills, we would have questions and analyses of the questions. Obviously, there's no absolutely right way of answering them, but we have analyses of key points and that sort of thing. Okay.
Right. So
So, as Eileen said, we need as much stakeholder involvement in that process as possible, and particularly around the blueprinting. We want to find out from people where the balance should lie on the assessment. So we want to continue these sorts of events to try and make sure that we engage with stakeholders and we get the stakeholder views as we go through this process. We already have a reference group which has been set up primarily, but not exclusively, with representative groups. So we have the Society for Legal Scholars, Stephen sits on it with his hat on from the SLS. The other academic legal learner societies are represented, Law Societies there, City of London Law Society. So lots of different representative groups there, Junior Lawyers Division, Association of Legal Aid Lawyers, so on and so forth. So all of those representative groups sit on that. We have that group to take forward discussions. We will be meeting later on this autumn, I expect. We haven't got a date in the diary, but I think we will be meeting later on this autumn as we develop our stakeholder engagement plan, and we have got some specific questions to take to the reference group. But we've been very clear that it's very important that we can't have everybody in the reference group, and we need to be fair in terms of, and even-handed in terms of the information we put out there. So everything, all the information that we take to the reference group, we will take, we will put on the LinkedIn pages, so that everybody gets access to the same information, and we are, as I say, as even-handed as possible. Of course, the beauty of LinkedIn is that people can then feedback comments back to us, so it can be a dialogue, it can be a two-way process. I think we've now got, Sarah Jane, haven't we, over 1,000, oh no, it's Richard, you were telling me these stats, we've got over 1,000 members of the LinkedIn group.
Quite close to that.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of people who are in that website, and we are, again, developing a series of pieces of information that we will put out through the LinkedIn group as we go through the autumn and into the piloting and testing phase. So that has been, it's been quite quiet, the LinkedIn group, but please, those of you who are already members of it, expect to see information come out. And those of you who are not members, then please do join, and you've got the URLs there on this slide. We will continue to publish information on our website, and we will continue to have meetings with representative groups, individual law firms and individual training providers. I have been around lots and lots of universities, including some of those who are here in the room today. I've been around lots of law firms. If I haven't been to see you, or if I have been to see you, you'd like me to go again, then please just let me know. I'm very, very happy to do that. From a selfish point of view, I find it really interesting and useful, and people often are able to talk in a little bit more detail about their plans, their thinking, their concerns than they can in a wider group. So very happy to go and talk to people if they will find that helpful. A shout out for our Career in Law Facebook page. This is about to be launched, and what this is, it's not actually an SQE specific resource, but this is about how to qualify as a solicitor. So it's for school children and students, law graduates, non-law graduates, law students, etc., to give them information about the processes of qualifying as a solicitor. And therefore it means that we will be talking about how you qualify under the existing system as well as changes to come. And that should be going live pretty soon, shouldn't it, Sarah?
Within the next month.
Yeah, within the next month that should be going live. So that's pretty nearly ready. And I think a very important thing for us to do to encourage people to qualify as solicitors. And then SQE Training Provider Conference. We had a conference last December at the University of Aston, which was very well attended. I think we had about sort of 90 universities represented in the room, so it was very widely attended. And we will be having another conference this year, this coming December, kindly hosted by colleagues at Coventry University. If you don't know about that and you haven't got that date in your diary, that's because we haven't launched the enrolment pages yet, but if you want to put a save the date in, please do. It's primarily aimed at universities, so it's an opportunity for universities to get together and discuss amongst themselves and hear
what's going on in the sector. But one of the questions we've got isn't it about the extent to which we have representation from the profession also there. So law firms who might want to just put that date in diaries too. And you can always email us, so the emails are there. And I should say as a final point that I did see people taking photographs of the slides earlier on, as Catherine queried before we started, and I should have said, we will circulate an email copy of these slides to you after this event. And then once we've run the final roundtable, which is in Manchester on Friday, we will put these slides on the LinkedIn pages, so they will be available publicly and there for people to share with colleagues internally. And I think that's it, isn't it, Eileen? So we've got another half hour left for you to ask any questions or raise any comments while you've got Eileen and I in the room with you. And I suppose we should also ask whether people who've been listening in or watching on Periscope have asked any questions.
Nope, not so far now.
No? Well, any of you who are out there listening and have a burning question to ask, then please do send it through. Yes, Stephen.
I have a question, it's for Eileen, and I'll take it by way of an example. One of the things SQE1 will cover will be principles of the law taught. You have to ask questions about the law taught. An uncertainty is in what depth will students have to prepare for questions on the law taught. So will they be expected to know Clark and Linsell on tort, or Winfield on tort, or a middle range book like Gilliker on tort, or a nutshell on tort, or short notes on the law of tort? Okay?
Yeah.
Will there be guidance on that, or will people just have to figure it out from the model questions?
Okay, so there will be, I mean, there's Annex 2, isn't there, which sets out the sort of topic areas, yes, essentially. There's a statement of competency and a threshold standard, and there will be model questions. Obviously, it will not be related to a particular book. They will not need to know case names and sort of quotes, case names or statutes or whatever. It should all be central application of central principles. And you want some more answer than that?
Well, it all turns on what counts as a central principle.
It does.
And given that principles always have exceptions and exceptions to the exceptions, how far down that hierarchy go?
So I mean, the Annex 2, which is the statement of legal knowledge, which there are some areas I think there's a bit more detail than other areas. There is a balance to be struck between, you can have a 1,000-page syllabus, which is what I think the GPs ended up with at some point. And I think the BPTC have a very detailed syllabus. Or you can have one that's very, very short. And you have to go somewhere in between, I think, because if you have 1,000 pages, it's going to be, well, people are going to start producing crises of it anyway. I think there should be enough guidance. I mean, the essential guidance is the statement of legal knowledge and the sample questions. But certainly, I mean, I take your point, what is a fundamental principle? But it should be illustrated by that statement of legal knowledge and by the sample questions, I would say.
Well, I have to say, the statement of legal knowledge does not really answer it. Clearly, there will be some additional information one can glean from the model questions, but I think I'm inferring that there is at the moment no plan to issue any further guidance on
what sort of guidance would you consider would work?
Well, I'll turn it round. I set a tort exam for my students. I set that exam in the light of what I tell them,
yes,
and what I know they've read in the books.
Yes.
Okay, and so I produce a fair assessment in the light of that group. Every single law school will have somebody different doing it in a different sort of way.
Yes.
With a centralised test on the foundation principles of the law taught, how is that going to be addressed? Because with respect to statement of knowledge, just gives you some headings of topics. It doesn't tell you what the depth is.
Well, I think one of the points is that it isn't going to be exactly what's being taught in the sense that it is meant to be about day one competence. and it is up to people to decide how they want to teach that. I mean, it's clearly not going to say you should read this book and you should read this book and this is the course material. Otherwise, you're going to end up with the Law Society finals, where, you know.
Yes, I mentioned the book simply as examples
Okay.
of different levels of detail that can be deployed on the legal subject. I'm not referring to them as possible textbooks for preparation.
I think the document that I can't remember the name of, sorry, what is it? The threshold.
Yeah.
The one that goes from 1 through to 5,
Yes.
and it has the band of the. I think that's an incredibly useful document that it took me a long time to realise how incredibly useful it is. And I'm presuming, although you might tell me wrong, that that's actually going to give us quite a guiding light on the level of what will be needed to learn.
So I think that that's absolutely right, and that sets out, you're quite right, the standard required for admission, and it looks at things like level of complexity, level of independent, ability to work independently and think independently, and so on. So I think that is a useful guide. What we will be doing is publishing a revised assessment specification. We understand that people in education training providers need to understand what is being assessed, as Eileen said in her slide earlier, and so we'll be looking at how we can express that as clearly as possible. I think I probably agree with Eileen that it's not necessarily helpful to have sort of just long lists of knowledge or exceptions to rules on specific areas to give that guidance. I think you can get bogged down into too much detail, which actually is also unhelpful for people. But it's a fair point that training providers and indeed candidates need to know what they will be assessed on, and we will be picking that up and trying to produce an assessment specification which addresses that. And it's fair to say that, as Eileen said, we will produce iterations of that, so there'll be an opportunity to comment on that as it goes through the various iterations.
The example MCQs were helpful, and I suppose in my head that's what I'd envisaged originally before I read the 120 questions in 180 minutes. At the risk of being cheeky and pushing you, are they going to get longer than a minute and a half? That sort of volume of text and
the multi-state bar exam has 1.8 minutes. QLTS has 1.8 minutes. It should certainly not be a race. I mean, they should get time to think about it. But and we have data on how long they can spend on each question. That seems to be about right, but I'm not saying that's exactly what it will be.
Can I just go back? I mean, I understand there's not really any prescriptive course manuals, so not like back to the LPC. So the LPC manuals that OU provided in the past. I mean, in terms of criminal litigation or business law and practice, some of the things that they'll be testing. I mean, is that completely up to the universities to decide how they want to package that material, having looked at the assessment?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
That's
it is up to them. I mean, whether, for instance, they want to teach criminal law at the same time as they teach criminal litigation.
Is the MSQ, is that the thank you, MCQ, I knew I got it wrong. Is that the way that or there are other ways that the knowledge is going to be assessed? So I get it with skills, that's different, but is that the way that the functional knowledge process knowledge is going to be?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry. That's exact form of MCQ, so there wouldn't be any sort of open response. It will all be ABCs you were in.
I think it will be all single best marks.
Oh, yes.
So there won't be short answer questions. Is that what you're thinking? No, there won't be short answer
not like
questions.
on the DPTC.
I have a question.
Okay.
Brian Hutchins at the University College Dublin has a question around sort of equivalence around, obviously, Irish kind of law and stuff. So, is there any decision or certainty on what equivalence means?
So I think I assume this is a question in relation to
is recognition of Irish law degrees in terms of timings and SQE, any decision on certainty of what equivalent means?
Yes. So in terms of recognition of Irish degrees, or degrees from elsewhere around the world, we have actually got a piece of paper which is published on our website, I think, around what we mean by degree or equivalent qualification, and that sets out what we mean for equivalent qualifications in the UK and what we mean for equivalent qualifications from around the world. So that's the thing to look at that, and actually probably what we can do is perhaps drop a line back if you've got his details, Sarah Jane.
Sorry, very tiny point, but earlier on the slides about the training principle.
Oh yes.
If a firm has a COLP,
yes,
it has to be the COLP that signs it off?
It does, yes.
Okay. So it can't be a training. If you choose to have a training principle, they can't assume that COLP.
No, so that's absolutely right. And just to be clear about that, yes, you're absolutely right. I will say if there is a COLP, it's the COLP's responsibility to sign it off. And the reason for that is that the COLP is ultimately responsible to us for the standards of competence, the standards of service of the firm for which they are COLP. Now, that we anticipate that a COLP, in a large firm is not going to have individual oversight of 200 trainees' work. But they can delegate that, and what they will need to satisfy themselves of is that there are proper processes and systems in the firm to make sure that students have had the opportunity to develop the competence, trainees have had the opportunity to develop the competences in the competence statement.
And that's, thank you, Julie, that's the last bit. So you'll be signing off that they've had the opportunity to develop the competences, not that they can.
That's exactly right. So they're not required to make any assessment of the standard that the trainee has reached. What they have to do is make an assessment of the sort of experience that they have had, which you would expect would give somebody an opportunity to develop the competencies. Thank you.
Can I just ask about SQE2? She says that there's not necessarily, the order is now no longer specific, so you don't have to look at your work-based training.
That's right.
I just wondered why that had changed, because my understanding was that work-based training was there to provide the trainee with the skills to then be able to have that.
Indeed, and so I think it hasn't changed around that in the sense that we do absolutely think that most candidates will need exposure to work in the office in order to develop the competences in the competence statement. So SQE2 is set at the standard that you would expect a trainee to reach by the end of their training contract, not at the beginning. And those people in the room who have experience of LPC teaching know how the profession has really pushed harder and harder about skills in relation to legal drafting, legal writing and so on. And it's been very, very difficult for the legal practice course to deliver what the profession wanted. And I think the answer for that is actually that in a classroom setting you can't replicate the day in, day out review of documents on an individual basis, the reading of files, the exposure to the sort of writing or the sort of task that a solicitor does, and then the feedback on that a trainee will get on an ongoing basis. It's very difficult to replicate that in the classroom. So we still see qualifying work experience as really being a very important way to develop the competencies that are assessed in SQE2. But we also recognise that there are people who may have developed those competences in different ways. If you have, for example, somebody who has perhaps qualified as a doctor and is changing their profession, or is qualified as an accountant and changed their profession, they've developed lots of these generic professional competencies already, and they may be able to take SQE2 at an earlier stage. And if that's the case, then we shouldn't restrict them from doing that if it works better for their circumstances. As I said before, what we're interested in is that they are safe to practice at the end of whatever process they have reached. Law firms have also said to us that they recognise, many of them, that qualifying work experience is critical in this. I mean, it's law firms who are very, very clear that this was a critically important part of the process of admission as a solicitor of England and Wales. But they wanted to have some flexibility about when within qualifying work experience candidates took this. So some law firms have said they might think about their trainees doing this after 12 months. Then they have a go. They may then pass, in which case they can go on perhaps to more specialist areas of practice. They can go and do overseas placements, or they can do placements with the firm's clients, which are very common during qualifying work experience. Or if a candidate is unsuccessful at first attempt, it gives them time to resit and still qualify at the end of the 2-year period. So it gives firms also a bit of flexibility about the exact timing of when they put forward their trainees for assessment. So I don't know if there are any other queries or questions. There are some ladies at the back from recruitment, and I'm just interested to get your view on whether you're getting any questions or queries from candidates coming through at the moment, or whether there's still sort of low awareness amongst candidates of these changes in the pipeline.
I get a few, but at the moment obviously we don't really know how to answer it anyway.
Right.
I think it will be quite a big thing that we'll get questioned on at law fairs, which are starting this month.
That's right, yeah.
So we'll probably see if we get them then, I think.
So that's right. Law firms start in October and run through to October and November.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're aware of that, and we're aware that, you know, if we can get information out about sort of cost and timing, even sort of before December, that would help. So we will see, you know, whether we can get stuff out through our internal governance processes as quickly as possible to help you with those law fairs and dealing with those questions. Yes.
Yes, I don't know if this question has been asked before, but being that this is going to be the only gateway that's going to control how many people become solicitors, I mean, what is the pass percentage going to be? How many people go out? Say 100%, how many people go?
So it's absolutely the critical question which goes to the heart of this and the heart of some of what Eileen was saying. So it's not we don't have a percentage of people who we say should pass. So we don't say, you know, the top 60% will pass or whatever it is. It's not a norm referenced assessment, it's a criterion referenced assessment. So we are neutral about the numbers of people who we expect to pass or fail. What we have is we have a clearly specified standard, and it's just simply about that. So that's about, you know, what we expect a newly qualified solicitor to know and be able to do.
But the score is going to be moderated, so
yes, the score's going to be moderated, but not by reference to the numbers. You know, 99% have passed, that's too many. It won't work like that. It will work by reference to how many people, how many candidates have demonstrated the competencies that they need in order to practice safely.
Standard setting methods, which means the methods of setting the pass mark, do not involve that kind of moderation of well, that, you know, we want to make so many percent pass or whatever.
So usually you must have some sort of a ballpark figure, because like people graduating from university with a first should naturally be able to pass this, or those with a graduate 2-1.
We have a standard.
So the way that it will work, and actually maybe I should hand over to Eileen at this point, but for example, for SQE1, there will be an ANGOF panel of expert practitioners who will make a judgment on each question about how many, you know, whether you would expect a newly qualified solicitor to know the answer to that question and get it right. And then there are also statistical measures as well, so you equate the standard between different sittings of the exam. So you will get a consistent standard over time, but both the pass mark and actually the pass rate may fluctuate over time, because the thing that stays consistent is the standard. And I think at that point, Eileen, I should hand over to you for a bit more detail.
I don't know if there's anything to add to that. I mean, there is no concept of the number that will pass or not pass. In terms of, you know, it'll be 50%. That's not how it's done. That's not really considered acceptable.
Well, if the universities don't know where the pass rate, the number is 60% or 50%, it's going to be how are you going to prepare the students if they don't know where?
Well, does the number give you an indication of how to prepare the students?
Well, at least they know what is enough for them to pass.
But they don't know what is enough to get that number.
They will want to train them to make sure they pass. So if it's 50%, they need to push them up, and it's below. So they need to know where the boundary is.
I think the number is the way that people are used to thinking about it. I don't think it actually does that job. Because what does it take to get 50%? So actually basing it on a standard and trying to articulate that standard, I think actually provides clearer guidance.
So I think you're quite right that people clearly need to know where the boundary lies, but the boundary is described not by a number, but by a description of what a just passing candidate should know and should be able to do.
Otherwise, you know, the cohort you sit with will make a difference. All of these things will make a difference. How difficult the paper is.
Yeah, so you can see
it is well established in terms of medical exams, as I said, in the UK, or exams in terms in the US and for law, professional exams for law, that it is considered a more defensible way of setting the pass mark.
And so, just to pick up that point from Eileen, you can see that example that if you happened, if we said, well, 50% of all candidates will pass, if you happen to be in a cohort where actually the average ability was harder than average, then the exam would be harder. And it would be unfair on candidates who happen to be in a cohort of students where the average ability was lower, when in that case it would be easier to pass the assessment. So it's the right thing to measure it against a boundary which describes the just passing candidate, rather than having just an arbitrary number, a percentage, which explains why they should go, which is how you decide how people pass or fail. I mean, it's one of those things that I think often new teachers often think, well, why is it that you can get 50% wrong in an exam, 50% wrong on the LPC and still qualify? Why is it that the BPTC is 60% and the LPC is 50%? And those are all just arbitrary numbers in themselves, unless they actually reflect a certain amount of knowledge which is required, which then isn't actually made explicit to people. And I think that's what this tries to do. It tries to make explicit where that boundary lies, because you're quite right that that boundary does need to be made clear to training providers and universities and candidates, so they know what they have to do to pass.
Can I just ask a question on the optional areas that currently
Yes.
I just wondered what the response has been, particularly from law firms, on using that element. I mean, you talked about some opportunity for law firms, but I just as a publisher and what we produce, I'm just interested in perhaps how people think of preparing for that without it being a standard.
So I think that there is still a lot of interest amongst law firms for their people to know those subjects, which is what you would expect. They are important areas, and us not including them doesn't mean in any sense that we suggest they're not important. They are really important areas of practice. So many of the city law firms are still anticipating that they will wish their people to be trained in corporate law. Likewise, family practices, employment practices, and so on will still, I would expect, want their people to know those subjects. I mean, at the moment, the oddity is that we require people to do some of those things, but we don't require them as a prerequisite for practice in those particular areas. So from a regulatory point of view, it's a bit of a nonsense, but we still require people to take those subjects. So again, I do think it's an opportunity, because I think different firms will have different requirements around those areas, but there's an opportunity for small firms to band together to get the numbers that they need to go and approach a training provider and say, could you do something for us? And I would encourage that, particularly in areas like social welfare law, family law, employment law. Often those sorts of firms may be taking only 2 or 3 trainees on alone, but if they get together with colleagues, with other law firms operating in similar areas, and then approach a training provider, that creates a really nice opportunity for them to work with the training provider to get the training that they need, which they know best. You know, those law firms know far better than we do what their people need for practice in those areas, and they can bespoke a course from a local training provider. That's why I think there is an opportunity there. Well, we're almost at 12 o'clock, so unless there is anything else that anybody's burning to raise, can I say thank you very much, and thank you for your questions and comments and contributions, which have been very helpful. So thanks very much.